Sometimes, the collapse of a man doesn't begin with a crime. It begins with a laugh. One so cruel, so careless, it cracks the surface of a carefully curated life and lets all the rot spill out. A billionaire laughed as his mistress poured wine on his pregnant wife. 3 weeks later, he was on trial. A tall crystal flute tipped precariously in the candlelit glow, sending a stream of rich burgundy wine cascading over a very pregnant woman's pristine white gown. Her husband, a powerful billionaire admired by some and loathed by others, threw his head back and laughed. Onlookers froze, transfixed by the spectacle. His mistress, triumphant, his wife, humiliated, and the man's cruel delight. Whispers raced around the lavish dining room. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning. In just 3 short weeks, that same man, once thought untouchable, would be on trial. Betrayals, secrets, and shocking revelations would soon unravel, changing everything they thought they knew. The late autumn night brought a gentle chill to the vibrant city of Monterey Heights. In the exclusive private lounge of the Halston, a high-end rooftop restaurant atop a sleek glass tower, soft music played against the clinking of silverware and hushed conversations. Tables were dressed in pristine linens, with the aroma of lemon butter sauce and rosemary roasted lamb floating in the air. The Halston was known for hosting only the most elite guests, and that evening, its crowning table, perched on a slightly raised platform overlooking the twinkling skyline, belonged to Donovan Blackwell, a billionaire known for his extravagant parties and high-profile business conquests. Donovan was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal Zegna suit with a single streak of gray across his temples, an air of seasoned confidence that came from decades of boardroom victories and betrayals. Beside him sat his pregnant wife, Elise Blackwell, glowing with the maternal grace that softened her usual sharp, no-nonsense demeanor. She wore a flowing white evening gown, carefully chosen to accommodate her growing baby bump. From afar, they looked like the quintessential power couple, but up close, tension simmered. Dining with them were business associates, longtime friends, and select local dignitaries. At the head of it all, seated too prominently for comfort, was Sienna Drake, a name that had surfaced in tabloids whenever cameras captured Donovan with someone who was very clearly not his wife. Sienna was a striking woman in her late 20s, her fiery auburn hair falling in loose waves over her shoulders, her slender figure highlighted by a figure-hugging crimson gown. Everyone at the table knew the nature of her relationship with Donovan. Whispers had circled for months, even as both denied it in public. The hush that fell when Sienna rose to make a toast was thick with unease. She lifted her crystal flute high, swaying slightly, her balance affected by more than just the wine. Elise watched her with clear discomfort, one hand resting protectively on her belly. Sienna leaned in. "Here's to us all," she purred. "To victory in business, in pleasure, and above all, in love." Her words slithered across the table like a dare. Several guests exchanged uneasy looks. Donovan merely watched her, lips curled in a slight smirk. He made no move to defend his wife or intervene. Silence stretched. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, Sienna tipped her glass. Deep red wine tumbled forward, splashing across Elise's white gown. Elise gasped and stood, but her movements were hindered by pregnancy. She stared down at the spreading stain in horror, her cheeks flushed with shock and humiliation. The room erupted in whispers, but louder than them all was Donovan's laughter. He watched his wife, soaked and trembling, and laughed, his voice echoing in the suffocating room. It was cruel, smug, almost celebratory. The man known for his poise and elegance now savored his wife's humiliation like it was a personal triumph. To cap it off, he lifted Sienna's hand and kissed it, ignoring Elise entirely. Just like that, one splash of wine turned whispered rumors into a public spectacle of betrayal, scorn, and heartbreak. That shocking moment became the night's defining memory. Yet no one imagined it would spark something far more serious. In 3 weeks' time, Donovan Blackwell, who once seemed to have it all, would find himself on trial. But for what? That question would haunt everyone at the Halston that night, from waitstaff to the city's highest social ranks. News of the wine incident spread rapidly. Guests and employees whispered among themselves, details exaggerated before morning. Social media lit up with posts recounting the event. Donovan Blackwell's pregnant wife humiliated. Affair explodes at elite Monterey Heights event. Mistress spills red wine in shocking scene. Hashtags trended on Twitter and Instagram. Even local newscasters, hungry for society gossip, aired segments about the confrontation. At the center of the chaos was Elise, who vanished from public life almost immediately. She canceled her OB appointment with Dr. Melinda Hale, relocated to a family friend's estate on the city outskirts, and ignored the reporters stationed at her gate. Pregnant and emotionally shattered, Elise tried to shield herself from the media storm. Meanwhile, Donovan appeared to revel in the controversy. He paraded Sienna to upscale events. They were photographed at the Monterey Polo Invitational, an art gallery opening, and a private soiree hosted by real estate mogul Camden Roy. At each event, Donovan wore his arrogance like a designer accessory, flaunting wealth and dismissing the moral outrage swirling around him. But beneath that polished exterior, cracks began to show. Anonymous letters began arriving, at his home, his offices, even Sienna's penthouse. Each one filled with veiled threats and cryptic references to secrets from Donovan's past. Strangely, there were no demands for money. The messages felt personal, dripping with vengeance. Quietly, Donovan hired a private security firm to investigate. It was a detail he kept from Sienna and his colleagues at Blackwell Enterprises. Then, on one particularly cold evening, an unannounced visitor arrived at Donovan's corporate suite. Detective Marcus Delaney, a man known for his methodical precision and intense stare. Though he wore a standard suit, his presence crackled with quiet authority. He flashed his badge. "I'd like a moment of your time," he said, voice calm. Donovan frowned, his mind racing. Did this have to do with the blackmail letters, the humiliating scandal with Sienna, or had Elise filed some kind of legal complaint? He searched the detective's expression for a clue, but found none. "Certainly, Detective," Donovan said, ushering Marcus Delaney into a private conference room. Once the door closed, the detective wasted no time. "I'm investigating an unusual complaint," Delaney began. "A sworn statement alleges you used intimidation tactics, threatened an individual connected to your wife's father, Judge Everett Langston." Donovan's face flickered with something. Confusion, perhaps alarm. Judge Langston was Elise's father, a retired judge with enormous influence in both legal and political spheres. Outwardly, Donovan had always maintained cordial relations with him. He wondered who could have come forward. "I can't imagine what you're referring to," he said smoothly. "Is it possible someone is trying to defame me over all the recent media attention?" Delaney shrugged. "Perhaps. But the complaint says you threatened Mr. Langston's associate over releasing damaging personal information. The statement was filed anonymously, but the details are very specific." Donovan's chest tightened. He forced himself to stay composed. "I assure you, if anyone is making these claims, they're false." Delaney studied him. "For your sake, I hope so. We'll be in touch." Within 10 minutes, the detective was gone. Donovan sat alone in the sterile room, the full weight of the situation beginning to settle. The wine incident at the Halston had only been the beginning. Now he was staring down blackmail, police inquiries, and potential lawsuits. Still, he clung to the belief that he was Donovan Blackwell, invincible. He believed that with money, power, and the right allies, he could weather any storm. What he didn't know was the avalanche heading his way. Meanwhile, across town, Elise sat in a quiet sitting room at her friend Marisa Caldwell's estate. She was deeply thankful for the refuge. Marisa, a friend from her university days at Tulane and a trusted confidant, owned a sprawling estate with lush gardens and secluded pathways far from the reach of paparazzi. Afternoon light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting warm hues over the cream-colored furniture and tall shelves lined with leather-bound books. Elise had just finished pouring her heart out, tears drying on her cheeks. "I just don't know what to do, Risa," she whispered, resting a hand protectively on her pregnant belly. "I can't go back. I can't just pretend like it's all okay. And honestly, I'm terrified. If I push back in the media, Donovan might retaliate." Marisa wrapped her in a gentle embrace. "You shouldn't go through this alone. Let your father help." Elise shook her head. "You know how he is. Once he steps in, it becomes a public trial, literally. I'm already a spectacle. He'll turn it into a crusade. I don't have the strength for that." Her voice wavered. Deep down, she wasn't just afraid of Donovan. She was afraid of herself. Afraid that all along she had ignored the signs. that some part of her had chosen comfort over truth. The thought that she had brought a child into such a mess made her chest ache with guilt she didn't know how to name. Just then, the door opened. An older man with a kind expression and slight stoop entered the room. It was Judge Everett Langston, her father, arriving unannounced. "Ellie," he said softly, using her childhood nickname. "Sorry to barge in, but I heard what happened. There's no way I could just sit back." Elise exhaled, defeated. "Dad." He walked over, took her hand, and sat beside her. "I know we've had our differences. I always saw Donovan as charismatic, but deep down, I wasn't sure he was the right man for you. Still, what's done is done. Now we need to protect you and my future grandchild." A wave of relief swept over Elise. Perhaps she had feared her father's overwhelming presence for too long. Now, with him here, she felt safer than she had in weeks. But Elise, even as she nodded, felt the quiet weight pressing down again. What if the damage was already done? What if her silence, even if born of fear, had made her complicit in something she didn't yet understand? Langston turned to Marisa. "I hope it's all right. I came uninvited. My daughter is in trouble, and I intend to help." "Anything Elise needs," Marisa said with a nod. "She knows she can count on me." Langston looked back to his daughter. "I'm going to reach out to a few former colleagues, speak with attorneys I trust. We'll see what legal recourse there is. Did you know that an anonymous complaint was filed against Donovan for threatening one of my former associates?" Elise's eyes widened. "No, what kind of threat?" "Something about blackmail. Details are murky, but it suggests Donovan's feeling cornered. Probably has to do with some shady dealings in his business. It's time we shine some light on whatever dark corners he's hiding in." Elise's throat tightened. "Dad, there's something I haven't told anyone." He waited, patient. "He's been getting strange deliveries, big packages, late at night. I asked once, and he told me it was none of my concern. And I've heard whispers about suspicious overseas transactions. I didn't ask more, because I was pregnant. I told myself to focus on the baby, but I think something illegal is going on." Langston's expression turned grim. "We're going to find out what it is," he said firmly. There was steel in his voice, reminding Elise of the unstoppable force her father had always been when justice was on the line. She had no idea then just how far things would spiral. That soon her husband would occupy the defendant's seat in a trial that would shake Monterey Heights to its core. Across the city, Sienna Drake was reveling in her newfound notoriety. Her new wave of fame brought in thousands of social media followers after the humiliating spectacle at the Halston, and she was milking the attention for all it was worth. For an aspiring socialite, it was gold. She posted filtered photos of herself with captions like, "Living my best life" or "Never settle for second place." She rarely mentioned Donovan, as though her sudden rise needed no footnotes. But despite her pride, Sienna wasn't entirely at peace. She kept noticing a silver sedan parked across from her penthouse building at strange hours. Its tinted windows revealed nothing. Calls from blocked numbers had become common, lines going silent the moment she answered. She chalked it up to paparazzi or disgruntled moralists who loathed her role as the other woman. But a darker fear gnawed at her. Maybe it wasn't just press or public outrage. Maybe it was something more dangerous. There were nights she lay awake in her silk-sheeted bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart thudding with dread. The thought that someone might be watching her, waiting, sent icy pulses down her spine. The glamour she worked so hard to build now felt like a paper-thin mask, stretched over something brittle and afraid. Late one night, she lounged in the open-concept living room of her penthouse, sipping a glass of Malbec. Her phone rang. The caller ID read blocked. Against her better judgment, she picked up. "I need to see you," said a low, urgent male voice. Sienna's heart thudded. She recognized that voice. It was Ridge McKinnon, a private investigator Donovan had occasionally hired for delicate matters. They'd crossed paths months earlier. "What do you want?" Sienna hissed. "Donovan's been paying me, but now he's walking back on promises. Let's just say I've got information on him and you that you wouldn't want getting out. We need to talk. In person." Sienna felt her stomach churn. The room suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in. Her fingers trembled around the wineglass, her throat tightening as the implications hit her. This wasn't just gossip or scandal anymore. This was danger. Real, legal, possibly life-altering danger. Are you blackmailing me? Ridge gave a cold laugh. Call it an opportunity. I'm giving you a chance to get ahead of the storm. Meet me at the old rail yard on the south side of Monterey Heights. Tomorrow night? 10 o'clock. He hung up before she could reply. She stared at the phone, stunned, mind racing. She remembered once seeing Ridge rifling through Donovan's office files under the pretense of tracking a competitor. If anyone had something damning, it was him. Should she tell Donovan? Her instincts screamed no. If he thought she was compromised, he'd cut her off, maybe worse. No, she'd handle this herself. That had always been her way. Carefully calculated moves, subtle power plays, pitting men against each other. But she'd never expected the stakes to get this high. Suddenly, her carefully curated world of champagne brunches and designer gowns felt like a house of cards swaying in a hurricane. One wrong move, and it could all crash down, publicly, permanently. By morning, her mind was made up. She'd go to the train yard. She'd find out what Ridge had on her, and Donovan. If the price was manageable, she'd buy his silence. If not, maybe she'd sell the information to someone else. Loyalty meant nothing. Not with Donovan. What he gave her could disappear in an instant. Money was fleeting. Reputation, she'd learned, was everything. Detective Marcus Delaney, meanwhile, was caught in a web of escalating leads and unanswered questions. The anonymous complaint, the cryptic blackmail letters, the rumors of threats tied to Judge Langston's associates, it all hinted at something far deeper than a cheating scandal. He couldn't yet see the full picture. But he knew the puzzle was forming. That afternoon, Delaney paid an unannounced visit to Elise at Marisa Caldwell's estate. His calm, professional tone put the house staff at ease. They led him to the sunlit solarium where Elise tended to orchids, trying to distract herself from the whirlwind her life had become. Startled, she looked up. "Detective," she said softly, brushing dirt from her hands. "Is something wrong?" "I'm here to check in, Mrs. Blackwell," he said, "and to follow up on some leads. May I sit?" She nodded, motioning to a rattan chair nearby. They settled into the soft light and fragrant air, but tension crackled beneath the calm. "Is Donovan in trouble?" Elise asked. Delaney cleared his throat. "I'm not at liberty to say, but if you know anything at all, about his business dealings or personal behavior that could relate to an ongoing investigation, it would help." Elise hesitated, pain clouding her eyes. "He's been getting strange packages, late at night, and I heard something about international accounts, but I don't have hard proof." She paused. "I stopped asking questions after I got pregnant. He shut me out, and I didn't want to fight anymore." Delaney studied her. There was vulnerability in her voice, but also something else. A quiet strength. "If you remember anything, no matter how small, call me." He pulled a business card from his coat. "Keep this with you. If you ever feel unsafe, call me directly." Elise accepted the card. She read the name, Detective Marcus Delaney, Monterey Heights PD. For a moment she felt something almost forgotten, safety. After he left, she stared at the card. Deep in her gut, she knew everything was converging toward something big, something violent, something she might not be able to stop. As much as she had suffered, she never imagined she'd live to see the day her husband was publicly investigated, or that she might one day be asked to testify against him. At precisely 10 the following night, Sienna Drake stepped out of her chauffeured car at the abandoned rail yard on the southern edge of Monterey Heights. Her stiletto heels clicked against the cracked pavement as she navigated a maze of rusted boxcars, shattered glass, and empty tracks. A single flickering street lamp cast harsh shadows into the darkness. A figure stepped out, Ridge McKinnon, wearing a hooded jacket. His sharp features were partially lit by the soft glow of a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You're late," he said, exhaling smoke. Sienna lifted her chin defiantly. "Cut the theatrics. What do you want?" Ridge dropped the cigarette and crushed it underfoot. "I was on Donovan's payroll to dig into some of his rivals, but I found more than I bargained for." Sienna's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Ridge reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it out like bait. "This? It's got everything. Bank records, passports, shipping manifests." He let that hang for a beat. "Let's just say your precious Donovan might be laundering money for some very dangerous people. If this gets out, he's finished." Sienna swallowed hard. She'd always suspected Donovan was shady, but actual criminal activity, on that scale, that could destroy him, and it could take her down with him. By association alone, the media would eat her alive. "Let me guess," she said, folding her arms. "You want me to pay you to keep it quiet?" Ridge grinned. "Smart girl, but it's not just about cash. I need protection. Powerful people are involved. Donovan's not the only one with a lot to lose." Sienna raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I can protect you?" "I know you have connections," Ridge said coolly. "The kind of people who can make calls, kill stories, shut down investigations. You make it happen. We split the prize. Donovan's secrets stay buried." Sienna considered. She did have some contacts in elite circles, but they were more into galas and legacy boards, not covering up federal crimes. Still, maybe she could maneuver them. If she refused, Ridge might take the flash drive to Elise, or Judge Langston, or worse, the press. The scandal would explode. She could already see the headlines. "Socialite Mistress linked to money laundering ring." "Fine," she said quietly. "Give me 24 hours. I'll see what I can do." Ridge studied her face, then handed her the drive. "I'll expect a call, same time tomorrow." Sienna nodded, slipped the flash drive into her handbag, and walked away, heart pounding. She had no illusions that Ridge had handed over the only copy. He surely had backups. Insurance. She was stepping into dangerous territory. But if she played it right, she might end up with more than just her reputation intact. She might carve out a bigger share of Donovan's empire for herself. What she didn't know was that behind a rusted boxcar, a silent observer had been recording the entire encounter. Detective Marcus Delaney had been tipped off about the meeting. His camera captured every moment. Muffled audio, but clear enough to identify both parties. For the first time, the murky scandal surrounding Donovan Blackwell was yielding concrete leads. His downfall wasn't just a possibility anymore. It was inevitable. 2 days later, Elise lay propped up on pillows in a guest room at Marisa Caldwell's estate. She'd been experiencing early contractions, false alarms according to Dr. Melinda Hale, but frightening nonetheless. She was only 7 months along, and the stress wasn't helping. As she tried to rest, she glanced at her phone. Multiple missed calls from unknown numbers. A pile of voicemails. Summoning her nerve, she played them. The first few were pushy reporters, but the last message sent a chill down her spine. A voice, distorted through a modulator, crackled. "You think you're safe at your friend's mansion. You have no idea what's coming. Stay out of Donovan's business, or you'll regret it." Elise's pulse spiked. Her free hand flew to her belly. Who would threaten a pregnant woman? It had to be one of Donovan's associates, or someone desperate to keep her quiet. She immediately called her father. "Ellie?" Judge Langston answered on the first ring. Her voice trembled. "Someone's threatening me, Dad. I don't know what to do. Send me the recording," he said sharply. "I'll have the police analyze it. We're not letting anyone intimidate you. I'll speak with Detective Delaney." Elise exhaled in shaky relief. "Okay, thank you. If you feel unsafe, even for a second, have Marisa bring you to my place. I have security. No one will touch you there." She nodded as the call ended, her mind spinning. A part of her wanted to run, leave Monterey Heights behind. But then, guilt and fury. Why should she be the one to run? She hadn't done anything wrong. She had suffered Donovan's betrayal, his public mockery, and now this? It was too much. She laid her hand gently on her belly and whispered, "I'll protect you, no matter what." Back at the corporate headquarters of Blackwell Enterprises, Donovan was in a foul mood. Deals were stalling. Board members were skittish. Investigations hung like thunderclouds. He had already fired 2 employees for asking the wrong questions about suspicious wire transfers. The anonymous letters kept arriving, never asking for money, just threats to reveal secrets. Reputations were on the line. And one night, as Donovan worked late, his phone rang. He recognized the number immediately. It was Bernard Cheney, the chief financial officer of Blackwell Enterprises. Bernard's voice trembled with thinly veiled panic. "Donovan," he said in a hushed tone, "we've been subpoenaed." Donovan froze. "Subpoenaed for what?" Bernard inhaled sharply. "The district attorney's office is investigating suspected money laundering through our international accounts. They're requesting all financial records from the last 18 months. Donovan's mouth went dry. "Tell them we'll cooperate. Stall. I'll bring in legal." Bernard hesitated. Donovan, legal can only do so much if they already suspect wrongdoing. We'll handle it, Donovan snapped. I won't let them tear this company apart. But once the call ended, his confidence faded into the shadows of his office. He sank into his leather chair, eyes drifting to the city skyline beyond the window. Sienna had grown distant, citing vague, personal matters. Police had cut off all communication except for what was necessary regarding the pregnancy. Even his trusted allies in the business world had become skittish. The walls were closing in. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was potentially criminal. His anger flared. At the blackmailers, at his father-in-law, at Elise for being weak, at the entire system. The wine incident at the Halston was child's play compared to what loomed ahead. He clenched his fists. No, he wouldn't let them destroy him. He'd do whatever it took to secure his fortune and his freedom. Judge Everett Langston had never been one to shrink from corruption, even in retirement. His career had been defined by his takedown of organized crime figures decades earlier. Now, with mounting evidence pointing to his own son-in-law, he couldn't stay silent. He arranged a private meeting with Donovan at a neutral location, an upscale hotel lounge in the heart of Monterey Heights. Donovan arrived in a dark overcoat, eyes scanning for potential eavesdroppers before sitting across from the judge. The tension was razor-sharp. You wanted to see me? Donovan asked coldly. Langston didn't flinch. Elise is receiving threats. She's carrying your child. I assume you're aware? A flicker of concern passed over Donovan's face, but quickly vanished. Threats? From who? That's what I intend to find out, Langston said calmly. But if you know anything, if they're connected to your business, put a stop to it. Donovan stiffened. I've never threatened my own wife. If someone's harassing her, it's not on me. How dare you? I'm implying your hands aren't clean, Donovan, Langston interrupted. Don't act surprised. The DA is on your trail. I have connections in that office. I know about the subpoena. Donovan's jaw tightened. So this is what it's about. Playing the concerned father card while threatening me? Langston's tone remained composed. This isn't intimidation. It's justice. You humiliated my daughter, betrayed her, and now your actions might be putting both her and that child in danger. I will not let that stand. Donovan scoffed. What are you going to do, old man? Pull some strings from your retired judge's bench? You can't make me disappear. I don't have to, Langston said flatly. The evidence is doing that for me. He leaned forward, voice low. Do the right thing. Offer Elise and the baby financial security. Keep them out of your mess. If you don't protect them. He let the sentence hang ominously. I'll use every connection I have to ruin you. They locked eyes in a battle of will. Finally, Donovan threw a few bills on the table to cover untouched drinks and stormed out. Langston watched him go, the familiar courtroom adrenaline pumping in his veins. He had no illusions Donovan would suddenly change. But he was ready for the war to come. That night, Sienna received another call from Ridge McKinnon. She'd spent the past 24 hours quietly reaching out to high society contacts, trying to gauge if anyone had the connections or the nerve to orchestrate a hush-up. It was harder than she'd imagined. Old money in Monterey Heights loved gossip when it served their agenda. But covering up potential federal crimes? That was another matter entirely. When she answered Ridge's call, his tone was terse. Any progress? Sienna gritted her teeth. I talked to some people. This isn't a one-call kind of fix. They need more, proof that it won't blow back on them. I gave you a flash drive, Ridge snapped. Isn't that enough? They want details, she fired back. Names, dates, transaction logs, something solid. If I walk in with half-baked info, they'll shut the door in my face. Ridge was silent for a beat. I can get more, but it's riskier, and I'll want a bigger cut. Sienna rolled her eyes. Of course you do. She took a deep breath. Look, if you give me something that ties Donovan directly to criminal activity, with evidence I can spin, maybe they'll bite. If they see an advantage, they might kill the story. Fine, Ridge said. Tomorrow night, same place. He hung up. Sienna exhaled, nerves fraying. Each day the danger grew. But if she pulled the right strings, she might still come out on top. This was becoming more dangerous with each passing day. If Donovan discovered that she was meddling, or if the authorities caught wind that she was helping cover up evidence, Sienna could be charged with obstruction of justice. Her entire future balanced on a razor's edge. Then, everything began to accelerate. court documents were leaked. A well-known journalist named Valerie James published an exposé in the Monterey Heights Ledger, suggesting Donovan's possible involvement in a vast money laundering operation connected to shady offshore networks. Elise was mentioned only in passing as the unsuspecting wife. Sienna's presence was overshadowed by the heavier criminal implications circling Donovan. Donovan had no choice but to lawyer up. His legal team scrambled to assure him the DA's case was weak, circumstantial at best, but new details surfaced daily. Detective Delaney quietly kept gathering data, including the footage from the train yard. Though the audio was incomplete, it suggested enough to justify an expanded investigation. Meanwhile, Elise, increasingly concerned for her safety, moved into her father's heavily guarded estate. She tried to stay calm for the sake of the baby. Still, a part of her grieved, for the man Donovan once was. In the beginning, he had been ambitious, charismatic, swept her off her feet. Now to see him orchestrating her public humiliation and dragging her into criminal chaos felt like a brutal betrayal. The estate was quiet, too quiet, luxurious but isolating. Though she was surrounded by staff, by her father's unwavering protection, Elise sometimes felt like she was floating through the days unseen. No one could fully understand what it was like to carry the child of a man being dismantled in headlines, to lie awake at night, wondering what name her son would carry into a world already casting shadows. The night Sienna was supposed to meet Ridge McKinnon again, thunder rolled overhead and storm clouds smothered the moonlight. She took a different car this time and wore practical clothes, a long coat over jeans and sneakers. For once, she wasn't dressing to be seen. She arrived at the deserted train yard, shivering against the cold night air. But Ridge was nowhere to be found. She paced, arms wrapped tightly around herself, tension coiling in her stomach. 10 minutes passed, nothing. She called him. No answer. 20 more minutes passed. A light drizzle started falling. Still no sign. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows. Relief briefly crossed her face, until the man stepped into the flickering light. It wasn't Ridge. It was Donovan. Her breath caught. He wore a dark coat, his face half hidden in shadow. "Sienna," he said in a low voice. "Expecting someone else?" She swallowed hard. "If he knows about Ridge, I'm finished." Trying to maintain composure, she stammered, I heard there might be paparazzi out here, trying to get photos of me. I came to check." Donovan's mouth curved into a humorless smile. "You must think I'm an idiot. I know you've been meeting with Ridge behind my back." He stepped closer, looming. "He's been feeding you lies about me, hasn't he? Trying to blackmail you with stolen files?" Sienna gave a hollow laugh. "Donovan, I would never do anything to betray you." His hand shot out, gripping her arm with bruising force. "I thought I could count on you," he said through clenched teeth. "But you're just like everyone else. Opportunistic, shallow, ready to jump ship the second things go south." She winced, struggling to break free. "Let go of me. You can't treat me like this." She stepped back, eyes blazing. "You let me humiliate your wife. You let me pour wine on a pregnant woman in front of half the city. And now you expect loyalty? Maybe you should have shown an ounce of decency before demanding it." Rage flickered in his eyes. The air between them crackled with tension. Suddenly, headlights swept across the train yard. Another car pulled in. Detective Delaney and 2 uniformed officers exited quickly. "Mr. Blackwell, Miss Drake," Delaney called, striding forward. "Is there a problem here?" Donovan immediately released Sienna, stepping back with visible irritation. "No problem, detective," he lied. "Just a misunderstanding." Sienna's pulse pounded as she forced her expression to remain calm. "Yes, just a misunderstanding," she echoed, voice barely steady. Delaney looked between them, unconvinced, but didn't press. "We received a tip about a possible altercation," he said. "Ms. Drake, are you sure you're all right?" She nodded quickly. "I'm fine." The detective gestured for the officers to give them space. Donovan shot Sienna a glare before turning toward his car. Before climbing in, he looked back over his shoulder. "We'll finish this later," he said, voice low and threatening. Once his car disappeared into the night, Delaney approached Sienna. "I need that flash drive," he said quietly. "You're in way over your head. If you cooperate, there could be a deal." Sienna met his gaze, her eyes swimming with fear and desperation. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. "Let's talk," she whispered. Over the next 72 hours, A flurry of private negotiations and legal maneuvers unfolded. Shaken by Donovan's aggression and realizing the DA would eventually uncover everything anyway, Sienna chose to cooperate. She handed over the flash drive and a backup link Ridge had provided. The evidence was damning, enough to connect Donovan Blackwell to multiple counts of money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud. The cruel irony? Ridge McKinnon never showed up again. Rumors began to spread. Rumors swirled. Some said Ridge McKinnon had fled Monterey Heights to avoid retaliation. Others whispered he had been taken care of. But no one had proof. Within days, the district attorney's office filed formal charges against Donovan Blackwell. A swarm of law enforcement officers descended on Blackwell Enterprises. Investigators seized computers, financial records, even entire servers. The media had a frenzy. News helicopters buzzed overhead, and cameras captured the moment the once revered billionaire was escorted in handcuffs from his luxury downtown penthouse. Elise watched it all live from her father's estate. Her stomach turned. Seeing the father of her unborn child like that was nauseating. Part of her still clung to the memory of the man he used to be, and she couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. But another part felt justified. This was the logical consequence of his arrogance, his greed, and his disregard for everyone's well-being but his own. A storm of flashbulbs, outraged shouts, and reporters blanketed the courthouse steps. It had been exactly 3 weeks since the night at the Halston, when Donovan let his mistress publicly pour wine on his pregnant wife. Now the sharply dressed millionaire appeared in a navy suit, flanked by his attorneys, heading into the Grand Marble Courthouse to stand trial. The charges were sweeping: financial crimes, intimidation, conspiracy. Judge Everett Langston sat in the gallery, not as a jurist, but as a father supporting his daughter. Elise, now visibly further along in her pregnancy, was seated quietly beside him. Her face looked drawn, her hands folded tightly over her belly. She was due in 2 months. The stress of the proceedings loomed over her like a weight. So far, she hadn't been called to the stand. But the threat of that moment hung over her like a storm cloud. Every day in that courtroom was like walking a tightrope over an abyss. The baby's occasional kicks reminded her that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was anchoring a future in the middle of chaos. On the other side of the courtroom, Sienna Drake entered separately, escorted by law enforcement. As a cooperating witness for the prosecution, she'd been granted legal leniency. When the bailiff called the court to order, all eyes turned forward. Donovan, seated beside his lawyers, maintained an icy facade, his fury barely concealed beneath the surface. This was his reckoning, a spectacle for all of Monterey Heights. The trial was expected to span several weeks, but even in opening statements, the scope of the evidence became clear. The prosecution painted Donovan as a manipulator, a man who had built a glittering empire while secretly orchestrating a web of fraud, bribery, and intimidation. The highlight of the first day came when the prosecutor introduced bank transfers that perfectly matched the data recovered from Sienna's flash drive. Donovan's legal team objected, arguing the chain of custody was questionable. The judge allowed the documents as preliminary evidence. Outside the courtroom, the public devoured every moment. National news channels dissected each testimony. Commentators speculated on outcomes. The story of Donovan's downfall, especially after the incident with his pregnant wife, captured the imagination of the nation. Elise sat quietly in the gallery, her mind spiraling. Was this the true end of her marriage, or the start of a new kind of nightmare? She began to wonder how she would raise a child under the shadow of a scandal this immense. She thought of lullabies in courtrooms, of nursery paint colors and sworn testimonies. The contrast was dizzying. She felt like a woman split in two. One side mother-to-be, the other reluctant witness in a public reckoning. Could she or her child ever truly escape Donovan Blackwell's disgrace? 2 days into the trial, a surprise witness emerged. Bernard Cheney, Donovan's CFO, had struck a deal with prosecutors. He took the stand and testified that Donovan had directed money through shell corporations and masked illegal shipments as legitimate business. Emails, memos, signed documents. The evidence was damning. The defense tried to discredit Bernard, calling him a desperate man saving himself, but the documents spoke louder than any argument. Next, Detective Marcus Delaney was called. He described the months-long investigation, culminating in the tip that led him to the train yard meeting between Sienna and Ridge. The defense tried to challenge his methods, but Delaney's reputation was solid. Then came the audio. Muffled, incomplete, but clear enough to capture Sienna and Ridge discussing hush money, illegal shipments, and offshore accounts. It strongly pointed to Donovan as the orchestrator. Sienna's appearance on the stand was highly anti-conservatively, makeup toned down. She portrayed herself as someone manipulated, drawn in by Donovan's power and influence. Under direct examination, she recounted the night at the Halston. Though the trial was focused on financial crimes, the prosecutor sought to show Donovan's character, his cruelty. "What did you feel that night?" the prosecutor asked, "when you poured wine on Mrs. Blackwell?" Sienna lowered her gaze, feigning regret. "I felt confused, pressured. Donovan, he was laughing, encouraging me. I didn't mean to hurt Elise. I just wanted his approval, his affection." The defense objected, irrelevant. But the judge allowed the testimony for context. Outside, the public devoured her statement. The trial had become about more than money. It was about the collapse of a man once thought untouchable. On the fourth day, Elise Blackwell was called to the stand. Her father sat just feet away, poised to intervene at any sign of distress. Her attorney had prepared her for cross-examination. Still, she was terrified. The baby shifted inside her, as if sensing her nerves. Her fingers curled tightly around the wooden armrest of the witness stand. She could hear her own breath, too shallow, too fast, echoing in her head. But she had to do this. For herself. For her child. Under direct questioning, the prosecutor's voice softened. "Mrs. Blackwell, can you describe your marital relationship with Mr. Blackwell in the months before his arrest?" Elise drew in a shaky breath, tears welling. He was distant. He took calls at strange hours. Left without warning, packages would arrive in the middle of the night, and he told me never to open them. If I asked about our finances, he got angry. "He once implied I should be grateful for the lifestyle he gave me," Elise said, voice steady, "and that I shouldn't ask questions." The prosecutor nodded, stepping closer. "Did you ever feel threatened by him?" Her gaze flicked briefly to Donovan, who stared back with an unreadable expression. "I felt unsafe," she answered, "especially after the dinner at the Halston. He laughed while his mistress humiliated me. He never apologized. After that, I started receiving threatening phone calls. I believe they were tied to his activities." The defense pounced during cross-examination, portraying Elise as a scorned wife looking for revenge. They painted her as emotional and unreliable. But Elise, prepared by her father's legal advice, stayed composed. She focused on facts, dates, events, specifics. Her calm demeanor impressed the courtroom. The jury watched her with empathy. Donovan watched with something darker, a storm behind his eyes. Elise's testimony, layered atop the avalanche of financial evidence, deepened the chasm Donovan was already in. The trial stretched on for 3 tense weeks, becoming a national sensation. And finally, the jury returned. Guilty, on multiple counts, conspiracy to commit money laundering, fraud, and intimidation. Sentencing would come later, but the verdict was clear. Donovan Blackwell, once the golden name of Monterey Heights, had been judged by a jury of his peers. Elise sat beside her father and quietly wept. It was a release, of fear, of tension, of the heavy burden she'd carried for months. Judge Langston laid a hand on her shoulder, silent in support. Sienna Drake, indicted as a co-conspirator, avoided prison. Her cooperation had earned her a plea deal. She would serve community service and pay steep fines. But her social aspirations were shattered. She left the courthouse with cameras flashing, her fall from grace broadcast everywhere. As Donovan was led away in handcuffs, he glanced back at Elise. For just a moment the masks slipped. Regret, perhaps. For the child he would not raise, for the betrayal, for the empire he'd lost. Or maybe it was just rage that everything had fallen apart. He said nothing. The courtroom doors closed behind him. A month later, Elise gave birth to a healthy baby boy, Samuel Donovan Blackwell. The name honored her father, but also carried the shadow of his. Elise poured herself into motherhood. She was determined to raise her child with love and honesty. Despite the media frenzy still lingering, she and her father set up a trust to protect the boy's future, independent from Donovan's ruined wealth. But even as she held him, a small voice in her heart whispered fears she hadn't dared speak aloud. What if people looked at him and only saw his father? What if one day he asked questions she wasn't ready to answer? The love was instant, infinite, but so was the weight. Elise kissed his forehead and vowed to shield him, not just from the world, but from the past that had tried to define them both. Sienna disappeared from Monterey Heights. Rumors suggested she had fled to Europe, trying to escape the shame. Some whispered she'd return under a new identity. But for now, she was toxic, the woman who poured wine on a pregnant wife and helped cover up a criminal empire. Detective Marcus Delaney received a commendation for his work on the Blackwell case. He moved on to other high-profile investigations, always carrying the reminder that behind luxury and success, shadows often lurk. And so, the story of Donovan Blackwell, laughing as his mistress poured wine on his pregnant wife, only to stand trial weeks later, became a modern cautionary tale in Monterey Heights. It proved how fast fortune can shift, how betrayal can trigger consequences no one can control, how, in chasing wealth, decency can vanish. But it also showed that justice, though delayed, can still find its way. This saga, of a man undone by his arrogance, of a wife betrayed but strong, of a mistress seduced by ambition, ended as it had to, with truth revealed, with justice served, with Donovan behind bars, and with Elise, holding her son, ready to build a life untainted by his corruption. She looked down at the tiny face resting against her chest, the rise and fall of his breath grounding her in the present. Her arms encircled him not just with love, but with purpose. The silence of the nursery, so different from courtroom chaos, wrapped around them like a vow. She had survived betrayal, shame, and fear. Now all that remained was to move forward. Not with wealth, but with strength and heart. Dear friend, some wounds never show on the surface, yet they shape who we become more than anything else. Elise's story reminds us that strength isn't found in avoiding pain, but in surviving it with our dignity intact. As the Stoics would say, we cannot control what happens to us, but we can choose how we respond. She chose to protect, to persevere, and ultimately to rise, not for revenge, but for her child, for herself, for peace. And maybe that's the quiet kind of power that outlasts all empires built on illusion. In the face of betrayal, may we all find the courage to choose grace over bitterness and a future brighter than the past. If this story moved you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories that inspire, stir, and remind us what truly matters.